Hey guys, Savage Joy here with Michael Bracamontes. He is from California and he's running for governor. He is actually a lawyer who studied at UC Berkeley, who is now taking his try in politics. So thank you so much for joining us, Michael, on Real Progressives.
Thanks for having me. I'm thrilled to be here.
Awesome. So how did that transition occur? How do you go from being a lawyer to getting into politics? I know it's not that uncommon because when Tim Canova was on, I asked him the same thing. So what was it that kind of made you decide to turn and go that route?
Well, I'm a civil rights attorney. I've been an attorney for 11 years, and we do housing work where we exclusively represent tenants against their landlords in habitability, slumlord type cases, mold, fire, carbon monoxide. We also handle employment cases, racial discrimination, sexual harassment, and we handle one or two police brutality cases at a time. And those aren't huge moneymakers for us, but I think they're important cases to take. So we've always had a civil justice oriented practice, and in looking at the way things were going in California and nationally to some degree, this is a natural extension, I think, of what we do on a day-to-day basis. So a lot of the skills transfer over in terms of the public speaking and the debate and that sort of thing. But really, I'm doing my best to serve the public as I have been for the past 11 years.
That's awesome. That's a really good way to compare it because you are still serving the public. That's a really good point. So how many people are actually running against you? I saw a few different numbers.
Yeah, there are four other Democratic candidates that I would say are running against me. I don't count the Republicans over here, even though I debated one last weekend. But there are four other Democratic gubernatorial candidates right now.
How'd that debate go with the Republican?
As expected. I mean, the Republicans, they have an interesting thing where their biggest issue in California is talking about the gas tax, which, it's a regressive tax, and it's certainly, I don't think, the way to go. But out of all the issues that we're facing in terms of housing, criminal justice reform, climate change, banning fracking, education, that's their number one issue. So I just find it pretty bizarre that that's what they've latched onto, and they think they're going to get a lot of traction with that in terms of public support, but I just don't see it happening.
Right. Did you ever consider, especially after the lack of a better term, clusterfuck we saw in 2016, did you consider going independent, or what were your thoughts? Why did you end up going Democrat?
I think it's important for us to really challenge our establishment Democrats. In 2008, when Obama won, that's what the Tea Party did. They had new faces, new energy, new ideas, and they really took it to their establishment Republicans. They didn't go form a third party or make some other types of runs or changes. They took it to their establishment. And I think now with Donald Trump in office, that's exactly what Democrats need to do, especially in California, where we like to often think of ourselves as the leaders of the left and the leaders of the progressive movement. But our state leadership, we've had the same people up top running the show and making decisions for the past 20 plus years. And we have a huge housing crisis here. The homeless population has exploded. People are spending 40-60% of their take-home income on housing. Our education system is all messed up. People, young folks going into college and graduating have tremendous college debt. And if you go to grad school, you're going to have student loan payments of $1,000, $1,500 a month. We've got a cash bail system here in California where the ACLU said recently that 63% of the people currently incarcerated in California haven't been convicted of a crime yet. They just can't afford bail. And here in my county in Alameda, in Northern California, that number is even higher. It's over 80%. So we've got huge problems. And the other gubernatorial candidates, they're establishment corporate Democrats or Republicans, whatever. But you know, right. they're part of the establishment. They've got 20 years of favors they've got to pay back. They've raised tens of millions of dollars over the course of their careers, so they can only offer incremental change. And we've got really huge problems that defy incremental solutions. We need to take some bold steps. I'm talking about statewide rent control, statewide just cause eviction protections, banning for-profit prisons, and changing police brutality laws to require police use the minimum amount of force when they're effectuating an arrest. And nobody else is talking about this stuff. So that's one of the other big drivers in terms of why I think it's important that regular people run for office. Otherwise, we're just left with professional politicians, millionaires, and celebrities to run the show.
And we see how that's working out. So, yeah, I mean, I think, that's something else Bernie taught us is like, we want someone who's not the 1%. They can't understand what we're going through. I'd rather vote for someone that actually has lived paycheck to paycheck and, as would others. So what would you do differently than the person who's in office right now?
Yeah. So one big thing, and I think this is really important, is that there are candidates running in California for all types of different offices that are corporate free. And why that's important in that they're not taking money from corporations is that then they can put the community's interest and the voters' interest ahead of any big money donors, right? So one thing like Jerry Brown took over $9 million from the oil and energy companies, and he got some legislation passed like Prop 30, but in exchange for that, he didn't ban fracking. He didn't shut down Aliso Canyon. He didn't, he passed a cap and trade bill that oil companies agreed with and signed on to. So if an oil company is agreeing with your climate change policy, it's probably not a very effective, probably not a very progressive policy. So that's a big step, I think, in the right direction. You have to put in corporate free candidates so that they're free to make those decisions. And professional politicians like Jerry Brown and the other candidates, they're concerned with the next election cycle. They're concerned with moving up the next rung on the political ladder. And we need people in office making decisions who don't have those types of considerations. We need regular folks.
Agree, and they should be scared because now we are the media, so we actually we have the upper hand now. We can actually tell them what we want, and that's why so many more Bernie-crats, progressives, what have you, are coming out and running because now we have a voice. What is your biggest passion? Like, I know you've talked about the housing crisis and criminal justice, things like that. What is your biggest passion that you feel like Congress should be focused on right now? And, things like that. What's the biggest thing?
For me, it's criminal justice reform. And again, these are cases I've handled as an attorney. And I've seen all kinds of outrageous cases where one example would be African-American gentleman's riding a bicycle and gets stopped for no light on his bike and ends up with a broken leg at the end of the confrontation. And there are 5 cops, all have body cameras, and every single body camera turns off when right when someone's about to hit the suspect. So police training reform is big for me. I think it's always struck me when judges and case law tell me that police are not required to use the minimum amount of force when effectuating an arrest. And so every time I've deposed a police officer, deposed a police practices expert, and I ask them, okay, well, what'd you do in this circumstance? They always say, well, I use the most amount of force that I'm legally entitled to in this situation. So if you move that bar down and to minimum, as opposed to where it is now, an unreasonable amount of force, that's the level where you get a civil rights violation. If you move that bar down, that informs how they're trained. And then you also mandate de-escalation training. Utah did a good job of emphasizing de-escalation training with its police force, and they went on, I think, a 15-month stretch where they did not have a police shooting. San Francisco's doing a little more of that now, but we have law enforcement agencies like Kern County and Bakersfield who have more fatal shootings than the NYPD. And we know there are more people in New York than in Bakersfield. So it's a big problem in California, and kind of mixed up with that criminal justice reform is for-profit prisons. We have companies and individuals making money off of keeping primarily brown and black people incarcerated. And we all know the numbers, that in the 70s there were 300,000 people incarcerated, and now there are over 2.2 million. And that has something to do with for-profit prisons lobbying for these tougher laws, right? We always hear about getting tougher on crime. But these for-profit prisons also run immigration detention centers. And so we've got to think that that also has something to do with it. Since 2005, the cost of housing an inmate in California has doubled. It costs $75,000 to house an inmate in California, which is more than sending someone to Harvard. There was a Department of Justice study in 2016 that said, well, they compared for-profit prisons with government-run facilities. And the for-profit prisons had higher incidence of inmate-on-inmate assaults and inmate-on-staff assaults. And we can guess why that is, because there are less guards in those facilities, and the guards are probably receiving less training so that they can increase profit. I think it's critical that we get these for-profit companies and we push back against the privatization of these government services, not just prisons, but education too, and we can get to that later. But all of this falls under the umbrella of criminal justice reform. And so we've seen in the past 2 years many incidents of police brutality or police shootings where politicians will hold a press conference. They'll talk about better relationships between the police and the community. There'll be a protest, but nobody ever talks about what laws we change to address these structural problems that enable these incidents to happen over and over again. I've never heard a politician talk about changing the underlying law concerning use of force. So that's something I'm very passionate about. It's a situation that disproportionately affects communities of color. Black men are more than twice as likely to be shot by the police. It affects our school to prison pipeline, where here in California, Latino and Black students comprise 45% of the student population, but they're 70% of the students that are arrested or referred to law enforcement from school. So we've got serious problems, and if the criminal justice system doesn't work, it really strikes at the heart of communities who are trying to escape poverty and have all these other external pressures. We have to trust our institutions, especially our institutions that have the word justice in them. We have to believe that everyone's getting a fair shake, and we have to make changes in order to make that happen, because right now the numbers just don't bear that out.
Totally agree. When you do those cases with police brutality, do you ever feel like why is it that the other police officers aren't coming out more? Shouldn't they be the most pissed off out of anyone? Do you feel like you get like some of the police officers are actually receptive to what you're doing and calling them out?
Yes. So I was giving this same talk, what I just told you, I said to a group in Modesto a couple weeks ago. There's an older gentleman who came up to me afterwards and said, I really respect what you said about police training reform. He said, I was law enforcement for 35 plus years. I was chief of police, and I think I drew my weapon once over the course of my career as a law enforcement officer. And he said, I didn't get paid to get in fights. I got paid to bring people into custody, and that was it. And I've had other law enforcement officers say, yeah, the training nowadays is just wildly different from what they received back in the day. So I think part of it is the training. We have the militarization of police, and we get all this military type of gear, and they're trained to use the most amount of force, right, when they're effectuating an arrest. So I think if we look at how we police and how we effectuate these arrests and emphasize de-escalation, where they're backing up, giving more verbal commands, you can retreat and wait for more backup to arrive, and go through the process of talking somebody down in certain situations. That makes it safer for everybody. It makes it safer for the community. It makes it safer for the officers at the end of the day, because they have another tool in their belt to get home safe. So I have had good feedback from law enforcement folks, and I think it's a conversation long overdue, not only in California, but nationwide.
Totally agree. On that, I'm sure as a lawyer and as someone who comes across as a humanitarian, I'm sure watching the DAPL, protest was pretty hard for you, because that was like one of the true militarization of police, like just shocks. We just saw it was, these are people who have prayer circles and they're completely harmless, and these guys show up just like ready for war. And so that those kind of things, those are scary when you see, like myself as an organizer, I'm in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. They just voted to give the police officers $70,000 more in riot equipment for people like me who want to go on the Capitol steps and use my right to, protest or march or whatever I want to do. And that's scary. Nobody wants to go and look at that. So, I think it's good. Maybe you can set the precedent in California, and then it only takes one person. We've learned this to, plant the seed, and then others will finally start coming along. So that's awesome. What are your plans to ensure high voter turnout?
That's the $1 million question in politics, I think. Trying to get young people turned out, trying to get poor people turned out, and trying to get communities of color to turn out on election day has always been a challenge in our democracy. And I've had multiple individuals who are involved in the political process that say, Mike, that's a complete waste of time. Don't do it. Concentrate on likely voters. And I think that's the wrong way to go. You have to engage the populations that need help the most. And that's what my platform is based on. It's based on helping regular working people. And it's based on making things more fair for those without political power. And I think if that's the platform and that's the message, that will resonate with folks in a way that past politicians haven't been able to. Part of it is, are your issues aligned with those individuals? Do the young folks have an issue in your platform where they say, yeah, I really get that, I understand that, and I'm willing to step up for that and take time out of my day, show up to my polling place and cast my ballot. So I don't need a focus group, things like that. I don't need a focus group to tell me that the housing costs are out of control in California. Everywhere I go, that's the same story. Nobody's ever told me, Mike, housing's good here. We're doing okay. It's not happening. And same thing with police training reform. Everybody wants to be treated fairly by the police. With respect to education, everybody wants quality education for their kids. Everybody wants access to college education. So I think if you put these issues at the forefront and people actually believe you're going to get something done because you're not beholden to corporations and special interests, then it makes it compelling. And one other thing, in California, in non-presidential years, gubernatorial primaries generally turn out to get into the number 1 or 2 spot. You need about 1.2 million votes. And we've got 40 million people in our state. And that's not a huge number, 1 million, in today's social media era. This isn't like 1990 where you had to run $20 million of TV ads in order to get your name out and get over the name recognition hump. So a lot of times people will say, well, Mike, you're not known. I was like, that's going to take care of itself with the message, with social media, where we're doing events 5 to 7 times a week in terms of getting our boots on the ground and talking with people face to face. So we're doing both, and I think you can really make a credible run nowadays if you really leverage all the technology that's available to you.
Absolutely. When are people voting in your district?
June 5th.
June 5th. Okay.
I've got some time.
Good. Because we want your name out there as much as possible. As far as California, of course, one of the things people talk about the most right now is Medicare for all. California got closer than any of us have. What do you anticipate as far as, hopefully you guys are going to set the precedent, and but what do you anticipate? Do you support Medicare for all, or where do you see it going from here?
Absolutely. I think healthcare is a right. It's ridiculous that as the richest country in the history of the world, that we claim we can't afford healthcare for all of our populace. We have other countries in the world that are already doing this. So it's not a matter of affording it. It's a matter of having the political will to get it done. And so here in California, we had a bill, SB 562, which was our single payer bill that was shelved by Anthony Rendon. And he takes a lot of money from health insurance companies and big pharma. And even for the other legislators and politicians who don't take money from these big industries, they're worried about having to go up against that big money in the next election cycle. So again, that's why it's important to have leaders who aren't tied or worried about those big money interests coming in and either swaying them by giving them money or scaring them by putting money up against them. So I think we can get it done in California. There was that UMass study that said in California, if we got single payer put in place, we may need a 2% increase in sales tax and gross receipts tax, but there are other savings that we're going to actualize in order to make it affordable. Also, things like homelessness will be impacted by healthcare for everybody. Many of our homeless population have substance abuse problems. They have mental health issues. And if those folks are getting the treatment they need and not just getting sporadic emergency room treatment, if they're getting real treatment, and we find ways to get them in halfway houses or other institutions that are going to be able to facilitate their entry back into society, then those are savings that we're all going to realize, both on the city level all the way through the state level, and it should be taken into account when we're talking about implementing single payer for everybody.
That is a really good point. I've actually never heard anybody say that. I work in healthcare, and that makes so much sense. Are you familiar with what MMT is? It's modern monetary theory. Basically, it's not really a theory, it's a science, basically where it's Bernie's financial campaign manager. She teaches it at Sanders Institute and so on, and his economic advisor, I should say. And basically, it's that taxes don't fund spending. So the government essentially has the money. They're just trying to keep us at bay. They would rather, just make us think it's not feasible for us to have such things. Are people like in your actual district where, you're having the voting and everything, are people active? Do you see a lot of protests, things like that?
California is very active, both Southern California and Northern California, and there have been a lot of different issues, as you know, since November to, I think, get people engaged. And if it's one silver lining from having a Trump administration, it's that you have a lot of people who would otherwise, I think, be sitting on the sidelines, really re-engaging or engaging in the political process, in activism, going to meetings. We've seen an explosion of all these different groups like Indivisible, Swing Left, Forward Majority, whatever it is, Our Revolution. And that's something I think that's in the long term a big plus for democracy, because we want people to participate and make the decisions, have their voice heard, because that's what puts the pressure on our public officials to do the right thing when they have conflicted interests between the right thing and keeping their big money donors happy.
I am so proud to say I was protesting before November 8th, and I'm sure as hell still would be if Schill was president. Hill. So I'm very proud of that. But yeah, no, I do. Like, I noticed when I was organizing marches and such, like my numbers went from like literally 20 to like 1,000. Like people really started waking up. And that's something that I found, like Trump kind of tried to divide us, and in many ways he has, but at the same time, he's kind of united us as well. Because we've been fighting harder than most of us have in our lives. So you're right. You can take something positive out of all this. And it's definitely that free education we wanted. That's for sure. How do you deal with the overabundance of cognitive dissonance with just as far as politics go as a whole? I mean, people are, it's rampant right now. People don't want to acknowledge certain things that are going on. How do you convince people when you're trying to sway them?
That's a good question. I think there's a tendency for every generation to think that their current political circumstance and their current political climate is more divisive than any others. So you look at, just Vietnam era is a good one, where it looks like the very fabric of our society, of our democracy, is going to rip apart. And we've got riots in the streets, we've got the civil rights movement, we've got all these things happening. And you go back even further, Stephen Jaffe likes to read this great quote from FDR, and it sounds like it was written today about Democrats kind of waffling and sitting on the fence between keeping their corporate masters happy and or being progressive and really putting forward ideas and policies that'll benefit the people in general. So we have to, I think, understand with our two-party system, there are individuals who are going to put party loyalty ahead of country. And so for those types of people, you're not going to get the type of compromise or changing of the minds or persuasive outcomes that you would if it was just regular people chatting about an issue at a cafe or something like that. And that's okay. Everybody's got a role to play, I think. So not getting too caught up in that, understanding there are going to be people that you can't really change their minds, or you're not going to change their minds anytime soon. If somebody's in the KKK and out marching in a white supremacy rally with a baton, a shield, and a helmet, you're probably not going to be able to convince them about certain things that you and I would likely agree on.
Oh, come on. Yes.
Yeah, you're probably not going to be able to get that done. So trying to find common ground where we can with people who are willing to listen and who are not so far and deep into their party politics or into some particular group. I think it's very important right now to reach out to those folks. And so an example of that, I kind of alluded to it earlier, but in California, we're a huge place, and we've got all kinds of different industries in California and all kinds of different demographics. We've got rural industries. We're the largest exporter of produce in the country, and we've got Silicon Valley. We've got the entertainment industry. But like I said, everybody, whether it's somebody in a rural small town or in San Francisco or Los Angeles, they want quality education for their kids. They want access to college. They want to be treated fairly by the police. They want to be able to work and be paid a fair wage. And so if we find the things that bind us, then I think we can still move forward and move in a direction that's beneficial for everybody.
And what do you think we could do in 2018 and 2020 election-wise? Like, I know you guys are closed primary as well, right?
Well, yeah, our primary works. It's the top two vote getters advance to the general. So it could be two Democrats, it could be two Republicans.
So what could we do? Are you a proponent of paper ballots, or what can we do differently? Because, and I'm not even necessarily talking about Russia, I'm talking about New York admitting, complete election fraud, DNC acknowledging in a court of law, things like that. Like, what can we do to, try to at least somewhat avoid?
We touched on it a little earlier in that since November, we're all more engaged. And like you said, when you organize marches or rallies or events, you're seeing an explosion of people responding and coming out. We need to carry that into kind of the mundane aspects of democracy. So it's not just always marching on the street, but it's volunteering on election day to be a poll observer, to count ballots during a recount, to help set up different polling places. If there aren't enough volunteers in a particular precinct, they'll close that polling place down, and that's going to impact who can come out and vote, or how far you got to travel to cast your vote. So it's something I've done. In 2008, I flew to Florida and did voter protection on election day in Duval County to make sure as an outside observer that everything was going well at the poll site. And I did the same thing in November. I flew to Ohio and was in the Cincinnati area. And there were a lot of out-of-state attorneys that flew into Ohio. I went to a training, and there were probably 150 of them that had flown in from all over the country to be observers at polling stations. So staying active in the political process, again, in the boring parts of the political process, is just as important as getting out to march against white supremacy, getting out to march for women's rights, getting out to defend DACA and other undocumented immigrants. We've got to also take that same energy into the election integrity process of democracy.
That is such a good point. I've never had anyone bring that up. That's a really good point. So I noticed that you are your donations that you're requesting are $27. So how do you think
I'm requesting more than that.
Well, you know what I mean.
If you've got 5,000 laying around, please donate it.
No, 27 max.
Right.
That's but I mean, we saw how that worked for Bernie. So
Yeah.
That's awesome. So you are completely against super PACs and everything like that. How do you think that is working for you? Are people trying to offer you endorsements, things like that?
Yeah, we're definitely headed in the right direction and we're picking up steam. My campaign is fairly new in comparison to everyone else. Everyone else has been running for over a year. We got to about a year outside of our primary when I decided to get in the race. So I've been in the race for about 4 months or so. And I've picked up a lot of traction in that 4-month time period without accepting any corporate donations. So we're headed in the right direction. We're building momentum. We're getting some pretty exciting endorsements, which we'll get up on the website soon. And I think as we increase our visibility through independent media, we actually have one of the things we're doing in our area is having the progressive candidates appear jointly at events to help raise our profile. So Stephen Jaffe, who's running against Nancy Pelosi, Gail McLaughlin, who was the mayor of Richmond, she's running for lieutenant governor, and we're all corporate-free candidates. So we've done some joint appearances together. We've got another one coming up next week, and the SF Chronicle is going to be moderating that event. So trying to think creatively, because we're not taking corporate money, how do we raise our profile together and get the message out? That's going to be important moving forward. But I think we're doing a great job of it so far, and we're going to continue moving in that direction as we head into the first quarter of next year.
That is a really, really brilliant idea to do joint events. I saw that on your website. I know Stephen. I've met him, and he's been on Real Progressives before. But that's brilliant to just get progressive candidates together for support. That's a really good idea. And what's your actual district number?
Well, I'm running for governor, so my district's California.
Oh, okay, right, okay. So one of the things, I actually hosted a Dem Enter, Dem Exit debate last week, which got kind of interesting. It's a bone of contention right now. So how do we deal with vote shaming? It's been almost a year, and still you look on Facebook or even in person and you hear constant, if you would have voted this way, and like, how can we move forward? What can we do from here?
I think it's important to understand that everybody has a role to play in progress. And I'll use the civil rights movement as an example. Martin Luther King was advocating for civil disobedience, but not necessarily any kind of violent revolution. But there were those who were advocating for violent resistance. It made MLK's negotiation and stance stronger to say, hey, there's a portion of the population who does not want to go this civil disobedience route when he's engaging with the government and the powers that be at the time. And his argument would not have been as effective if there wasn't that other faction out there. So same thing here today. We have to understand that everybody has a different role to play, and that's okay. You shouldn't malign somebody because they're playing a different role than you are. Just appreciate that everyone's trying to head in the same direction. So don't take it personal. Don't get too wrapped up, because like you said, people are very touchy about this subject right now. The Hillary supporters, the Bernie supporters, the Dem Exit, Dem Enter. we all want the same thing, which is to ultimately get the Republicans and those who are beholden to corporate interests out of power.
Totally agree. What is your message to people who are completely defeated and they just want to give up? They're, what we're going through right now is pretty catastrophic. So what is your message to people who feel like they just don't have any fight left in them?
I've talked to a lot of people like that who said, Mike, I've worked on multiple progressive campaigns in a row. I'm spent. I'm done. I would say to those people, take a break. That's okay. You don't have to be on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. If you need to take a month or two to recharge, we're going to be here holding down the fort while you're gone. I would also say to people who are really feeling the despair of the moment that you're not alone. Everybody has felt this way since November. We're all in it together. And we all recognize what is at stake moving forward. So take strength and solace in the fact that a lot of people are showing up to marches, a lot of people are showing up to community events, and a lot of people are going to show up to the polls in 2018 to bring a positive change to society.
Right on. Is there anything else you want to address or speak out?
Yeah, just a little bit about my background and why I really felt the need that I had to run for office. I grew up in East Los Angeles. I've attended public school since I was in kindergarten through law school. My kids attend public school. My wife attended public school. She's the granddaughter of migrant farm workers. She was the first one in her family to go to college. We had our son when we were in college, and I worked 35 hours a week and had a full course load in undergrad. So I know what it's like to work through college pretty much full time. I've since then started a business, bought a house, and I consider myself a hard worker, a pretty smart guy, but I don't think I can do what I did in today's environment. And it's okay to acknowledge that the kids who are in school right now have been dealt an unfair set of circumstances. It's okay to acknowledge that people who are working right now are not being paid a livable wage, and that's not fair. I mean, the kind of societal agreement was if you work 40 hours a week, you were a productive member of society, and that would be enough to afford housing, a car, take a vacation once a year, that sort of thing. And we don't have that now. We've kind of let the market run its course, and we have the greatest gap in wealth and income inequality that we've ever had as a country. And it's okay to say that this system's rigged and it's not fair, and you can't just work your way up. It's not a meritocracy, and we need leaders who are willing to say that so that they can bring those big solutions to the forefront to get back to a situation where someone who wants to work hard can move up and has that social mobility, because I don't think it exists right now. And I want to make sure that my son has that when he goes to college. He's a senior in high school right now. I want to make sure my neighbors' kids have that, and I want to make sure my friends who are not in Silicon Valley have that as well. So that's why I decided to run. That's the lens that I'm looking at these problems through, and that's why I think it's important that we all get out and engage in the political process.
So right on. I'm so glad I had you on the show. You were awesome.
Well, thanks. I know,
fangirl, but I'm really glad you came on because you are bringing up a lot of good points. And let's see, what is one thing you want everyone to take away from this interview? Like if you could give just one final point.
I'm not good at one point. I'll give you like 3 quick points.
Well, it could be like expand it.
Yeah. With housing, we need statewide rent control, just cause eviction protections for everybody. We need a livable wage. We need to do away with college tuition as we know it today and get back to how college costs in the 1960s. And one thing I will say about that is the older generation sometimes will say the millennials and the younger folks are lazy and they're entitled. And I think that's a false narrative. The older folks never had 6 figures of debt coming out of college. So really what this generation is asking for is the same opportunity that the baby boomer plus generation had when they were of college age. And along those lines, we need to push back against the privatization of public education, kindergarten through high school. Charter schools, I think, are fundamentally bad. We need to reform criminal justice to make it fair for everybody. And those were I would say, 6 things that I would want people to take away from this interview.
So if people want to follow you, want to donate, want a phone bank, Canvas, anything like that, do you want to just give your Facebook, website, Instagram, all that fun stuff?
Sure. MichaelBracamontes.com is the website. Last name is spelled B as in boy, RACAMONTES. So MichaelBracamontes.com. You can volunteer there. You can donate. You can also request a speaker if you want to host a house party and have 20 friends over. We'll come out. I'll chat with your group or your organization, your school club, whatever it is. But we're staying on the road and talking to anyone and everyone that'll listen.
That's phenomenal. That is a really good idea. I think that's all I have, but thank you so much for coming on, Michael. I wish you the best of luck. You are amazing, and I will definitely promote you to everyone in California.
Appreciate the time, and thanks for having me on.
Absolutely. Take care.
All right, you too. Bye.